You know that feeling when you're lying in bed at 2 a.m., your mind racing through the same decision for the 100th time. You've weighed every option, analyzed every angle, considered every possible outcome. And yet, somehow, you're further from a decision than when you started. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The more you think about certain decisions, the harder they become. Not easier, harder. Let me ask you something. When was the last time overthinking actually helped you make a better choice? I'll wait. Because if you're honest with yourself, you'll realize that your best decisions, the ones that truly moved your life forward, they didn't come from endless analysis. They came from clarity, confidence, and action. But somewhere along the way, we convinced ourselves that thinking more equals deciding better. And that lie is costing you opportunities, time, and peace of mind every single day. Right now, you might be stuck in a decision. Maybe it's about changing careers. Maybe it's about starting that business you've been dreaming about. Maybe it's something as simple as whether to have that difficult conversation with someone you care about. And you're waiting for perfect clarity, waiting for guaranteed certainty, waiting for a sign that never comes. But here's what you need to understand. That waiting isn't wisdom, it's fear dressed up as caution. Let's get real for a moment. Imagine you're standing at a crossroads in your career. You've been offered a position at a startup, exciting but risky, versus staying at your stable corporate job. At first, you approach it logically. You list the pros and cons, salary comparison, growth potential, work-life balance, commute time. Simple enough, right? But then overthinking creeps in like fog rolling over San Francisco Bay. What if the startup fails in 6 months? What if you're making a mistake leaving your current network? What if the new team culture doesn't fit? What if? What if? What if? Each question spawns 3 more questions. Each doubt multiplies into a dozen scenarios. Before you know it, you've constructed an entire mental labyrinth where every path seems to lead to potential disaster. You're not making progress. You're going in circles. And that, my friend, is what we call analysis paralysis. Here's the thing about analysis paralysis. It feels productive. You're sitting there with your laptop, spreadsheets open, researching company reviews, reading articles about career transitions. Your brain tells you that you're being thorough, responsible, smart. But you're not analyzing anymore. You're stuck. You're repeating the same thought patterns, visiting the same fears, justifying the same hesitations. It's like running on a mental treadmill, lots of effort, 0 distance covered, and the cruel irony, while you're overthinking, while you're trying to eliminate every shred of uncertainty, life is moving forward without you. That opportunity you're agonizing over, someone else just said yes to a similar one and is already learning, growing, adapting. That conversation you keep rehearsing in your head, the other person has moved on, assuming your silence means you don't care. Overthinking doesn't just delay decisions, it steals the present moment from you. Let's talk about why this happens. Your brain is wired for survival, not success. Deep in your neural circuitry, there's an ancient alarm system designed to keep you alive in a world of physical threats. Lions, cliffs, poisonous berries. In that world, hesitation before action made sense. But we're not in that world anymore. You're not facing a lion. You're facing a job offer. You're facing a business opportunity. You're facing a relationship choice. And your brain is treating it like life or death. This is where it gets interesting. Your mind craves certainty. It wants guarantees. It wants to know with 100% accuracy that the choice you make will work out perfectly. But life doesn't operate on guarantees. Life operates on probabilities, on calculated risks, on learning as you go. The need for perfect certainty is what fuels overthinking. You keep analyzing because you keep hoping that just one more piece of information, just one more perspective, will give you that magical guarantee. It won't. Think about the last time you made a quick decision. Maybe you were traveling in Barcelona and someone suggested checking out a hidden tapas place in El Born. You didn't spend 3 hours researching reviews. You didn't create a comparison chart of all nearby restaurants. You just went. And you know what? Maybe it was amazing. Maybe it was just okay. But you experienced it, you moved forward, and you didn't waste your evening paralyzed by restaurant analysis. Now contrast that with a big decision. Suddenly, you need to examine it from 47 angles. You need to consult everyone you know. You need to read every article ever written on the topic. You need to predict outcomes 5 years into the future. And here's where the trap closes. The more variables you add to your analysis, the more confused you become. 3 factors? Manageable. 30 factors? Overwhelming. Each new piece of information doesn't clarify, it complicates. Let me share something that might sting a little. Often, overthinking isn't about gathering information, it's about avoiding responsibility. As long as you're still thinking about it, you don't have to face the discomfort of committing. You don't have to risk being wrong. You don't have to deal with potential failure. Overthinking becomes a sophisticated form of procrastination, a way to stay safely on the fence while convincing yourself you're being prudent. But here's what successful people understand that most don't. They know that clarity doesn't always come from thinking. Sometimes clarity comes from doing. Action reveals information that no amount of analysis ever could. When you actually start that business, you learn things about yourself, about the market, about execution that you could never have predicted sitting at your kitchen table with a notebook. When you have that difficult conversation, you discover nuances and possibilities that existed nowhere in your mental rehearsals. Let's get practical for a second. You're probably thinking, okay, but I can't just flip a coin on important decisions. And you're right. I'm not saying don't think. I'm saying don't overthink. There's a massive difference. Thinking is gathering relevant information, considering key factors, and making an informed choice. Overthinking is circling the same thoughts endlessly, inventing problems that don't exist, and paralyzing yourself with imaginary worst-case scenarios. Here's a test you can run on yourself right now. Think about a decision you're currently wrestling with. Now ask yourself, am I gathering new, relevant information? Or am I rehashing the same fears and doubts I had 3 days ago? If it's the latter, congratulations, you've identified overthinking. And the solution isn't more thinking. The solution is setting a decision deadline and honoring it. Imagine you're redecorating your apartment in Brooklyn. You need to choose a paint color for your living room. You could spend weeks comparing swatches, reading color psychology articles, consulting with 5 different friends, analyzing how the light hits the wall at different times of day. Or you could pick a color that feels right, try it, and if you hate it, repaint. It's reversible. Most decisions are, but we treat reversible decisions like they're permanent. We agonize over them as if one wrong move will derail our entire existence. This is the mental distortion that feeds overthinking. We catastrophize. We take a simple choice and inflate it into a life-defining moment. And then we wonder why we feel so much pressure, why we can't just decide and move on. Let's talk about confidence for a moment. Overthinking absolutely destroys it. In the beginning, when you first consider a decision, you have an intuitive sense. Your gut gives you a signal. Maybe it's excitement, maybe it's caution, but it's clear. Then you start overthinking. You question that initial feeling. You second-guess yourself. You wonder if you're missing something crucial. And with each cycle of doubt, your confidence erodes. You start asking yourself, am I really qualified to make this choice? What if I'm not seeing the full picture? What if everyone else knows something I don't? And these questions don't strengthen your decision-making. They weaken it. They disconnect you from your own judgment. Pretty soon, you trust strangers on the internet more than you trust yourself. You trust vague advice from people who don't know your situation more than your own experience and instinct. Here's something fascinating. When you observe truly successful entrepreneurs, leaders, artists, they don't make perfect decisions. They make timely decisions. They gather enough information to be reasonably confident, and then they commit. They understand that execution beats endless planning. They know that a decent decision made today and acted upon is worth more than a perfect decision made 6 months from now. Why? Because action generates feedback, real-world feedback, not theoretical feedback. When you launch that product, you learn what customers actually want, not what you think they might want. When you start that exercise routine, you learn how your body responds, not how bodies in general respond to exercise. Reality teaches you things that thinking never could. But overthinking pulls you away from reality. It traps you in your head, in a world of hypotheticals and scenarios and what-ifs. And in that mental world, you can convince yourself of anything. You can build elaborate justifications for inaction. You can create convincing narratives about why now isn't the right time, why you need more preparation, why the risks are too high. Let me tell you what's really happening when you overthink. You're not problem-solving, you're problem-creating. You're manufacturing obstacles that don't exist yet. You're borrowing trouble from a future that may never arrive. You're running simulations of disaster in your mind and then treating those simulations as if they're inevitable realities. Someone offers you a chance to co-lead a project at work. Immediately, your mind goes to, what if I mess up and everyone sees? What if my co-leader is difficult to work with? What if this takes too much time and I burn out? What if I succeed and then people expect more from me? Notice something? Every single one of those is a future fear, not a present reality. You're not dealing with actual problems. You're dealing with imagined ones. And here's the kicker. Most of those imagined problems never materialize. Studies on worry show that roughly 85% of what we worry about never happens. And for the 15% that does happen, 79% of people report handling it better than they expected. So you're spending enormous mental energy on scenarios that are either unlikely or manageable. That's not strategic thinking. That's mental self-sabotage. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, but I need to be prepared. I need to consider all possibilities. And yes, preparation matters. But there's a difference between healthy preparation and obsessive rumination. Healthy preparation looks like, what are the three biggest risks here? How can I mitigate them? What's my plan if things don't work out? That's clean, actionable thinking. Obsessive rumination looks like, what if this happens and then that happens and then this other thing happens and what about this unlikely scenario and what if people think this and what if I feel that way? See the difference? One is focused and leads to action. The other is scattered and leads to paralysis. Let me give you a framework that changed everything for me. It's called enough information. Here's the principle. For every decision, there's a threshold of information that's enough to make a reasonable choice. Not perfect. Reasonable. Your job isn't to gather infinite data. Your job is to identify that threshold and act when you reach it. For example, if you're choosing a laptop, you don't need to read every review ever written. You need to know your budget, your primary use case, and compare 3 to 5 solid options. That's enough. If you're deciding whether to take an online course, you don't need to analyze every single module. You need to know if it covers what you want to learn, if the instructor is credible, and if you can afford it. That's enough. But we blow past enough all the time. We keep researching, keep comparing, keep seeking more opinions, and ironically, more information often leads to worse decisions, not better ones. Why? Because information overload creates confusion. When you're comparing 40 options instead of 4, when you're trying to weigh 27 factors instead of 3, your brain can't process it effectively. You end up more confused than when you started. Here's a practical technique: decision deadlines. When you're facing a choice, set a specific timeline. I will decide by Friday at 5 p.m. During that window, gather your information, think it through, consult if needed, but when Friday at 5 p.m. arrives, you decide. No extensions, no just a little more time. You choose and you move forward. This does two powerful things. First, it prevents endless deliberation. Second, it trains your brain that decisions have boundaries. You can't think forever. At some point, you have to choose. And that constraint actually improves decision quality because it forces you to focus on what truly matters rather than getting lost in trivial details. Another powerful concept: the good enough mindset. This idea comes from satisficing, a decision-making strategy where you choose the first option that meets your criteria, rather than searching for the absolute optimal option. The perfect is the enemy of the good. When you chase perfection, you often end up with nothing. When you accept good enough, you end up with results, experience, and forward momentum. Think about it. If you're hiring someone for your team, you could interview 100 candidates searching for the perfect fit, or you could define your must-haves. Interview until you find someone who checks those boxes, and hire them. Will they be perfect? No. Will they be good enough to succeed? Probably. And you'll learn more about what you actually need by working with them than by conducting endless interviews. This doesn't mean lowering your standards. It means distinguishing between standards and perfectionism. Standards say, this needs to meet these specific criteria. Perfectionism says, this needs to be flawless in every conceivable way. One is achievable. The other is a mirage that keeps you stuck. let me talk about something that might surprise you: the relationship between overthinking and the present moment. When you're caught in analysis paralysis, where are you mentally? You're either in the past, rehashing old experiences and mistakes, or you're in the future, worrying about outcomes that haven't happened yet. You're anywhere but here, now. And that matters because the present is where life actually happens. The present is where you have power. You can't change the past. You can't control the future, but you can act now. Overthinking robs you of that power. It keeps you mentally time traveling while the current moment, the only moment where you can actually do something, slips away. This is why mindfulness practices help with decision making. When you bring yourself back to the present, when you notice that you're spiraling into overthinking, you can interrupt the pattern. You can ask, what do I know right now? What can I do right now? That simple reorientation cuts through the mental clutter and reconnects you with clarity. Here's something else worth examining: the role of emotion in overthinking. Often we overthink because we're trying to think our way out of feeling something uncomfortable. Fear, uncertainty, vulnerability. We believe that if we just analyze enough, we can eliminate those feelings. But feelings don't work that way. You can't logic your way out of fear. You can only acknowledge it, accept it, and act despite it. When you're deciding whether to speak up in a meeting with a bold idea, the overthinking isn't really about the idea's merit. It's about the fear of judgment, the fear of being wrong, the fear of standing out. No amount of mental rehearsal will eliminate that fear, but taking the action, speaking up despite the fear, that's what builds courage. That's what builds confidence. That's what moves you forward. So let me ask you directly, what decision are you overthinking right now? What choice have you been circling for days, weeks, maybe months? And more importantly, what's the real reason you haven't decided? Is it truly lack of information? Or is it fear dressed up as caution? Is it genuinely complexity? Or is it discomfort with uncertainty? Because here's the truth you need to hear. You already know what to do. Somewhere beneath the layers of analysis, beneath the what-ifs and the worst-case scenarios, beneath the advice from others and the conflicting information, there's a knowing. Your intuition has already signaled. Your gut has already spoken. But you've been taught to distrust it. You've been taught that real decisions require spreadsheets and logic and exhaustive research. And yes, logic matters, research matters, but they're tools, not masters. They should inform your decision, not replace your judgment. When you overthink, you're essentially saying, I don't trust myself to handle whatever comes from this choice. But you can. You've handled every challenge your life has thrown at you so far. You've navigated uncertainty before. You've recovered from mistakes. You're more capable than your overthinking gives you credit for. Let me share something practical you can do right now. Get a piece of paper. Write down the decision you're struggling with at the top. Then, set a timer for 5 minutes. In those 5 minutes, write down every thought, fear, question, concern that comes up about this decision. Don't filter, don't organize, just dump it all out. When the timer stops, read what you wrote. I guarantee you'll see patterns. You'll see the same fears repeated in different words. You'll see assumptions that might not be true. You'll see that a lot of your overthinking is just mental noise, not legitimate concerns. This exercise externalizes your thoughts, and when you see them on paper, you can evaluate them objectively rather than swimming in them subjectively. Now, take another piece of paper. Write down 3 questions. What's the worst realistic outcome? Can I handle that? What's the best realistic outcome? Notice I said realistic, not worst case scenario catastrophic or best case scenario magical. Realistic. Because your overthinking brain loves extremes. It loves to imagine total disaster or perfect success. But reality lives in the middle. When you answer those questions honestly, you'll often find that the worst realistic outcome is manageable. Disappointing, maybe, uncomfortable, perhaps, but manageable. And that realization is liberating, because if you can handle the worst realistic outcome, then the decision becomes much less scary. You're not risking everything. You're taking a calculated step with downside protection. Here's another powerful shift. Stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "What would I do if I trusted myself?" That second question bypasses the overthinking and connects you directly to your judgment. It assumes you have the wisdom to decide, you just need to access it. And often, the answer comes quickly and clearly when you frame it that way. I want to be clear about something. I'm not saying be reckless. I'm not saying ignore information. I'm not saying just wing it on important life choices. What I'm saying is that there's a point where thinking stops helping and starts hurting. And you need to recognize that point and have the courage to decide anyway. Because indecision is itself a decision. When you don't choose, you're choosing to let circumstances choose for you. You're choosing to let time pass. You're choosing to stay where you are. And sometimes that's fine. But often, it's just fear masquerading as prudence. There's something most people don't realize about intuition. They think it's some mystical sixth sense, some magical power that a lucky few are born with. But that's not what intuition is at all. Intuition is pattern recognition on steroids. It's your brain processing thousands of data points from your past experiences and delivering an instant conclusion without you consciously working through the steps. And here's the fascinating part. It gets stronger with experience, not weaker. Think about when you first learned to drive. Remember how overwhelming it was? You had to consciously think about every single action. Check the mirror, signal, check the blind spot, ease off the gas, apply the brake, turn the wheel. Every movement required deliberate thought. Your brain was working overtime just to keep the car going straight. But now you drive while having a conversation, listening to a podcast, planning your day. Your hands and feet make thousands of micro adjustments without conscious thought. That's not magic. That's intuition, built through repetition and experience. Your brain has processed so many driving situations that it's created shortcuts, neural pathways that fire automatically when certain conditions arise. Someone cuts you off in traffic on the freeway outside Austin. You don't stop to analyze the physics of braking distance and steering angles. You react instantly, and usually correctly. That's intuition. The same mechanism applies to every area of life where you've built experience. A seasoned chef walks into a kitchen and knows within seconds if something's off just by the smell, the temperature, the energy of the space. They're not consciously checking a list. Their intuition, built from thousands of hours in kitchens, is signaling. A veteran teacher can tell within the first 10 minutes of class whether students understand the material, not by testing them, but by reading subtle cues in body language, questions, facial expressions. Here's where it gets really interesting for decision-making. When you have deep experience in a domain, Your intuition often delivers better, faster decisions than lengthy analysis. Why? Because it's processing complexity that your conscious mind can't handle. It's weighing variables you don't even know you're considering. It's accessing a database of similar situations you've encountered and extrapolating outcomes. But here's the critical nuance that most people miss. Intuition is only as good as the experience it's built on. If you've never run a business, your gut feeling about a business opportunity isn't intuition. It's a guess flavored by hope or fear. If you've never been in a serious relationship, your instincts about partnership aren't wisdom. They're projections from movies and friend stories. This is why blindly following your gut in unfamiliar territory can lead you off a cliff. Let me give you a concrete example. Imagine you're a software engineer who's been coding for 15 years. You're reviewing a piece of architecture for a new system. Within minutes, maybe seconds, you get a feeling. Something's not right. You can't immediately articulate why. The logic seems sound. The documentation is thorough. But your gut is sending up red flags. What's happening? Your brain is recognizing patterns from the hundreds of systems you've worked with. Maybe the structure reminds you of a project that had scalability issues 5 years ago. Maybe the approach is similar to something that caused maintenance headaches at your last company. You're not consciously making these connections, but your intuition is. And if you're smart, you listen, you dig deeper, and often you'll find the problem your conscious analysis missed. Now contrast that with someone who just finished a coding boot camp 3 months ago. They look at the same architecture. They might get a feeling too. But that feeling isn't built on pattern recognition from extensive experience. It's built on limited exposure, incomplete understanding, and probably some anxiety about their own competence. Should they trust that feeling the same way the veteran engineer trusts theirs? Absolutely not. This is the razor's edge of intuition. It's incredibly powerful when you have domain expertise. It's dangerously misleading when you don't. And most people can't tell the difference. They confuse any strong feeling with valid intuition. They trust their gut about things they know nothing about and wonder why they keep making poor choices. So, how do you know when to trust your intuition? Ask yourself 3 questions. First, do I have significant experience in this area? Not theoretical knowledge, actual hands-on experience. Second, have I seen similar situations before? Your intuition works by matching current circumstances to past patterns. If there are no past patterns, there's no valid intuition. Third, what's my emotional state? Because here's a trap. Anxiety, excitement, fear, and desire all create strong feelings that masquerade as intuition, but aren't. Let's talk about that third point for a moment. You're considering investing in a friend startup. You get a strong feeling that this is going to be huge. Is that intuition? Or is that excitement about the possibility of quick returns mixed with the desire to support your friend? You can't tell just by the intensity of the feeling. Emotions are loud. They're convincing. They feel like truth. But they're not the same as pattern-based intuition. Real intuition usually has a different quality. It's quieter. It's more neutral. It's not, I really want this to work, or I'm terrified this will fail. It's more like, this feels right, or something's off here. It's information, not emotion. Though I'll admit, the line between them can be blurry, especially when stakes are high. Here's a practical technique for distinguishing intuition from emotional noise. When you get a strong feeling about a decision, pause. Ask yourself, if I had no emotional investment in this outcome, if I were advising a stranger in this exact situation, what would my gut say? That little bit of distance can help you separate genuine intuition from wishful thinking or fear-based hesitation. Now, let's address the speed factor. One of the most valuable aspects of intuition is its speed. In situations where you need to decide quickly, where there's no time for lengthy analysis, intuition is your best tool, assuming you have relevant experience. A paramedic arriving at an accident scene doesn't have time to consult textbooks. They assess, they intuit based on training and experience, they act. Speed saves lives. In business, speed often determines who captures an opportunity. Two entrepreneurs spot the same market gap. One spends 6 months doing feasibility studies, market research, focus groups. The other trusts their industry intuition, builds a minimum viable product in 6 weeks, and launches. Who learns more? Who adapts faster? Who's more likely to succeed? Often, it's the one who balanced analysis with intuitive action. But here's where people get it wrong. They think trust your gut means ignore all analysis. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that when you have expertise, when you've paid your dues in a field, your intuition deserves a seat at the decision-making table. It shouldn't be the only voice, but it shouldn't be ignored either. Think of it like this. You're a marketing director deciding on a campaign strategy. You could run the numbers, analyze demographics, A/B test every element. That's valuable. But you've also run 50 campaigns over 10 years. Your intuition about what will resonate with your audience, that matters too. The best decision probably comes from combining both, the data and the gut feel. They're not opponents, they're partners. Let me tell you what happens when you systematically ignore your intuition. You start to lose confidence in your own judgment. You become dependent on external validation. You need 3 more opinions, 5 more data points, 10 more case studies before you can commit to anything. You've essentially outsourced your decision-making to processes and other people. And while that might feel safe, it's actually making you weaker. Because here's the thing. Nobody knows your specific situation, your specific strengths, your specific constraints better than you do. That consultant you hired, they have frameworks and best practices, great. But they don't have your intuition about your team, your market, your unique circumstances. The book you read, it has principles and case studies. Useful. But it doesn't have real-time feedback from your environment. Your intuition, built from your specific experiences, is customized intelligence. It's a competitive advantage. When you silence it in favor of generic advice and standardized processes, you're throwing away one of your most valuable assets. Now, I can hear some of you pushing back, but I've trusted my gut before and been wrong. Yes, you have. Because intuition isn't infallible. Nothing is. The question isn't whether intuition is always right. The question is whether it's right more often than random chance, and whether combining it with analysis produces better outcomes than analysis alone. And the research is pretty clear. In areas where you have expertise, the answer to both questions is yes. Here's a different way to think about it. Your intuition is like a smoke detector. When it goes off, you don't ignore it, but you also don't evacuate the building without checking if there's actually a fire. You investigate. If your gut says something's wrong with this job offer, you don't necessarily reject it immediately, but you do look closer. You ask more questions. You pay attention to details you might have glossed over. Your intuition is pointing you toward something worth examining. Let's talk about how to actually develop stronger intuition. First principle, you need experience. Not passive experience, active experience. You need to be making decisions, seeing outcomes, learning from results. Reading about marketing doesn't build marketing intuition. Running actual campaigns, analyzing what worked and what didn't, that builds intuition. Second principle, you need reflection. Experience alone isn't enough. You need to process it. After a project succeeds or fails, after a decision plays out, you need to ask, what worked? What didn't? What would I do differently? What patterns do I notice? This reflection is how your brain converts raw experience into reusable patterns. Without it, you just accumulate random events rather than building wisdom. Third principle, you need to actually use your intuition. If you never trust it, if you always override it with analysis or external advice, it atrophies. It's like a muscle. Use it or lose it. Start with low-stakes decisions. What should I order for lunch? Which route should I take home? Which task should I tackle first today? Notice what your gut says. Act on it. See what happens. Build trust incrementally. I know someone who did this systematically. She's a product manager at a tech company in Seattle. She started keeping a decision journal. Whenever she had a significant choice to make, she'd write down her initial gut reaction before doing any analysis. Then she'd do her research, gather input, make her final decision. Months later, she'd go back and compare. How often was her initial intuition aligned with her final choice? When they differed, which one led to better outcomes? Over time, she developed a much clearer sense of when her intuition was reliable and when it was being influenced by bias or emotion. She learned that her gut was excellent at reading people and team dynamics, but poor at technical architecture decisions, which wasn't her area of expertise. That self-knowledge made her dramatically more effective. She knew when to trust her instinct and when to defer to others. This brings up an important point about intuition and collaboration. Just because you trust your gut doesn't mean you ignore other people's expertise. In fact, the opposite. When you're confident in your own intuition within your domain, you're more open to others' intuition in theirs. You're not trying to analyze and control everything. You can trust the designer's instinct about visual hierarchy, the engineer's gut about technical feasibility, the salesperson's feel for customer sentiment. Here's something subtle but crucial. Overthinking often happens when you're trying to use analysis to compensate for lack of intuition. You don't have experience in an area, so you don't have a gut feel. So you try to build certainty through research. But all the research in the world can't replicate the pattern recognition that comes from doing. So you end up in analysis paralysis, trying to think your way to a confidence that only experience can provide. The solution isn't to trust uninformed gut feelings. The solution is to recognize that in unfamiliar territory, you need a different approach. Small experiments, pilot projects, talking to people who do have experience, learning by doing, building intuition through action, rather than trying to decide perfectly before acting. Let me give you an example. You're thinking about starting a podcast. You have no experience with audio production, content creation, or building an audience. Your intuition is basically silent because you have no relevant patterns to draw from. You could spend months researching equipment, studying successful podcasts, reading about content strategy, or you could record 3 episodes with your phone, publish them, and see what you learn. Which approach builds intuition faster? The second one, because now you have direct experience. You know how it feels to structure an episode, to edit audio, to put your voice out there. That experience creates the foundation for intuition. Your next decisions about the podcast will be informed by real feedback, not theoretical understanding. This is why successful entrepreneurs often say things like, just start or launch before you're ready. They're not being reckless. They understand that intuition develops through iteration, not contemplation. They'd rather make small, reversible decisions quickly and build intuition through feedback than try to think their way to perfect clarity. There's also a confidence component here that's worth examining. When you trust your intuition and it works out, your self-confidence grows. You learn to trust yourself. And that trust is incredibly valuable in future decisions. Conversely, when you constantly second-guess yourself, when you override your instincts in favor of other people's opinions or endless analysis, you train yourself not to trust your own judgment. I'm not talking about arrogance. I'm talking about earned confidence, the kind that comes from having been in situations, made choices, learned from outcomes, and developed reliable pattern recognition. That confidence allows you to make decisions with appropriate speed and conviction rather than getting stuck in self-doubt. Here's a nuanced point. Sometimes your intuition tells you to slow down. You're being pitched an investment opportunity. On paper, it looks great, but something feels off. You can't articulate what. That's your intuition signaling. And the right response might be to slow down, ask more questions, do more due diligence. Trusting your gut doesn't always mean acting fast. Sometimes it means pumping the brakes. The key is learning to read the signal. Is your intuition saying, this is right, move forward, or something's wrong here, be careful, or is it just noise from anxiety or excitement? This discernment is a skill, and like any skill, it improves with practice and reflection. Let me address a common misconception. Some people think intuition and logic are opposites, that you have to choose between being analytical or instinctive. That's completely wrong. The most effective decision makers use both. They use analysis to gather information, identify options, understand constraints. They use intuition to synthesize that information, recognize patterns, and make the final call. It's not either or, it's both and. Think about a chess grandmaster. Are they purely intuitive, just feeling their way through games? No. They've studied theory, analyzed positions, learned patterns, but in the moment, when they're playing, they're not consciously calculating every possible move. They're using intuition, built on that foundation of knowledge and experience. They see the board, and certain moves feel right. Certain positions feel strong or weak. That's pattern recognition at the highest level. You can develop the same capability in your domain. Study the fundamentals, build experience, reflect on outcomes, and gradually you'll develop a reliable intuition that guides your decisions more efficiently than pure analysis ever could. Now, let's talk about what happens when intuition conflicts with analysis. You've done the research. The logical choice is clear, but your gut is screaming the opposite. What do? First, don't dismiss either signal. This conflict is valuable information. It means something important is happening beneath the surface. Ask yourself, what is my intuition picking up that the analysis missed? Maybe it's picking up on interpersonal dynamics that aren't captured in the data. Maybe it's recognizing a pattern similar to a past failure. Maybe it's identifying risk factors that are hard to quantify. Your job is to figure out what signal your intuition is sending and why. Sometimes, after investigation, you'll realize your intuition was responding to fear or bias, not pattern recognition. Other times, you'll discover that your gut was right, that there was a critical factor the analysis overlooked. Either way, the conflict forced you to think more deeply, and that's valuable. Here's my practical recommendation. In your areas of expertise, give your intuition significant weight. In unfamiliar territory, weight analysis more heavily, but don't completely ignore intuitive signals. And in all cases, recognize that the goal is making good enough decisions and learning from them, not achieving perfect certainty before acting. Because at the end of the day, intuition isn't a shortcut to avoid thinking. It's a tool that makes thinking more efficient and effective when you have the experience to back it up. It's compressed wisdom, pattern recognition, accumulated learning delivered at high speed. And in a world that's moving faster than ever, where opportunities appear and disappear quickly, the ability to make solid decisions rapidly is a massive competitive advantage. So stop dismissing those gut feelings. Start investigating them. Start building experience in areas that matter to you. Start reflecting on your decisions and outcomes. Start trusting yourself incrementally. Your intuition is trying to help you. The question is, are you listening? Let's talk about something uncomfortable. You think you're rational. You think when you make decisions, you're weighing facts, considering evidence, thinking logically. But here's the truth. Your brain is lying to you. Right now, as you read this, cognitive biases are shaping your thoughts, influencing your choices, and distorting your perception of reality. And the worst part? You don't even know it's happening. This is why overthinking doesn't actually lead to better decisions. Because you're not overthinking with a clear, objective mind. You're overthinking with a biased mind. You're running the same distorted patterns over and over, convincing yourself you're being thorough when really you're just reinforcing your existing beliefs and fears. It's like trying to see clearly by looking through the same dirty window from 50 different angles. The view doesn't get clearer. The dirt is still there. Let me show you what I mean. Imagine you're considering leaving your job in Chicago to join a startup in Denver. At first, you approach it rationally. Salary, growth potential, cost of living, company culture. But then something subtle happens. You start noticing articles about startup failures. You start remembering that friend whose startup imploded. You start seeing risk everywhere. And here's the critical part. You think you're just being thorough, gathering information, being smart. But you're not. You're experiencing confirmation bias. Once your brain decided startups are risky, It started filtering reality to confirm that belief. You're not neutrally evaluating information anymore. You're selectively gathering evidence that supports your fear. And the more evidence you find, the more convinced you become that you're right. It's a self-reinforcing loop disguised as research. This is one of the most dangerous aspects of overthinking. It feels productive. It feels like you're making progress. You're reading articles, talking to people, making lists. But you're not actually moving closer to a decision. You're moving deeper into a mental trap, collecting ammunition for a conclusion your brain already reached on an emotional level. Here's another one that gets almost everyone: loss aversion. Your brain is hardwired to feel losses more intensely than gains. Psychologists have measured this. Losing $100 hurts about twice as much as gaining $100 feels good. This asymmetry completely warps your decision-making, especially when overthinking kicks in. Back to that job decision. When you think about the potential upside of the startup, you feel some excitement. But when you think about potentially losing your current stability, your steady paycheck, your established reputation, the fear is visceral. It's overwhelming. So you spend 90% of your mental energy analyzing downside risks and maybe 10% considering upside potential. You think you're being balanced? You're not. Your brain's loss aversion is steering you toward staying put, and you're rationalizing it as prudence. This is why people stay in mediocre situations forever. Not because staying is objectively the best choice, but because loss aversion makes the pain of leaving feel unbearable, while the pain of staying feels tolerable. You're not comparing two futures objectively. You're comparing them through a lens that magnifies potential losses and minimizes potential gains. And then there's the sunk cost fallacy. You've been in your current role for 5 years. You've built relationships, earned credibility, invested time. The thought of walking away from all that investment feels wrong. So even though the opportunity ahead might be better, even though staying might mean stagnation, you keep thinking, but I've already put in 5 years here. As if time already spent should determine time yet to be spent. This is your brain tricking you. Those 5 years are gone. They're sunk. The only question that matters is, given where I am right now, which path forward is better? But overthinking lets sunk costs creep in. You start justifying staying because of what you've already invested, not because staying is actually the right move. And the more you think about it, the more weight those sunk costs gain in your mind. Let me give you a different example. You're in a relationship that's not working. You've been together for 3 years. You've met each other's families. You've made plans. You've built a life together. The relationship isn't terrible, but it's not great either. You know deep down that you're not truly compatible. But every time you consider ending it, you think, but we've been together for 3 years. We've been through so much. That's sunk cost thinking. Those 3 years happened. They're not coming back whether you stay or leave. The question is, do you want to invest 3 more years or 10 more years or a lifetime in something that fundamentally doesn't work? But overthinking won't answer that question clearly, because your brain keeps dragging the past into a decision that should only be about the future. Now let's talk about the availability heuristic. This is your brain's tendency to judge probability based on how easily examples come to mind. You hear about a plane crash, and suddenly flying feels dangerous, even though statistically it's incredibly safe. You know someone who got food poisoning from sushi, and now you're hesitant to eat it, even though millions of people eat sushi safely every day. This bias infiltrates overthinking constantly. You're thinking about starting a YouTube channel. You immediately remember that creator who worked for 2 years and got nowhere. Or maybe you saw an article about how saturated the platform is. Those examples are vivid, recent, easily accessible in your memory. So your brain concludes YouTube is nearly impossible to succeed at. But you're not considering the thousands of creators who did find success. You're not balancing the equation. You're letting a few memorable examples shape your entire perception of probability. And the more you think about it, the more those examples dominate your mental landscape. Overthinking amplifies the availability bias rather than correcting it. Here's one that's particularly insidious: the overconfidence bias. This seems like the opposite of what we've been talking about, but it plays into overthinking in a subtle way. Sometimes you're not overthinking because you're uncertain. You're overthinking because you're convinced you're right, and you're trying to justify that conviction. Let me explain. You have a strong opinion about how your team should approach a project. You're confident in your perspective, but there's some pushback. So you start analyzing, researching, building arguments. It looks like you're being open-minded, considering different angles. But really, you're searching for validation. You're looking for data that confirms what you already believe and dismissing or minimizing anything that contradicts it. This is overthinking as defense mechanism. You're not genuinely exploring possibilities. You're fortifying a position. And the dangerous part is that it feels like rigorous thinking. You're spending hours researching, reading, analyzing, but it's all pointed in one direction: proving yourself right. The antidote to these biases isn't more thinking, it's better thinking. And better thinking starts with awareness. You have to accept that your brain is not a neutral processor of information. It has built-in distortions. It takes shortcuts. It protects ego. It avoids pain. And it's doing all of this below your conscious awareness. So when you catch yourself overthinking a decision, pause. Ask yourself, what bias might be operating here? Am I only looking for information that confirms what I already believe? Am I overweighting potential losses compared to potential gains? Am I letting past investments dictate future choices? Am I judging probability based on vivid examples rather than actual data? Just asking these questions disrupts the bias loop. It creates a moment of meta-awareness where you step outside your thought stream and observe it. And in that observation, you often see the distortion clearly. You realize, oh, I'm not actually weighing this objectively. I'm scared of losing what I have, and that fear is driving my entire analysis. Here's a practical technique: forced perspective taking. When you're stuck in overthinking, imagine you're advising your best friend in this exact situation. What would you tell them? Often, the answer comes quickly and clearly. Why? Because you're not emotionally entangled. Your biases aren't as activated. You can see the situation more objectively. Or try this. Imagine the decision is already made. You took the job. You started the business. You ended the relationship. How do you feel? Now imagine the opposite. You stayed. You didn't start it. You kept the relationship. How do you feel? Sometimes, this mental simulation reveals where your genuine preference lies, underneath all the analytical noise. Another powerful approach: actively seek disconfirming evidence. If you think something is too risky, force yourself to find examples of it working. If you think something is a sure thing, force yourself to identify how it could fail. This isn't natural. Your brain resists it. Confirmation bias wants you to keep gathering supporting evidence, but consciously fighting that tendency produces better thinking. I know a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley who uses this systematically. When his team is excited about an investment, he assigns someone to play devil's advocate. Their job is to build the case against investing, not half-heartedly, but rigorously. Find the risks, identify the weaknesses, challenge the assumptions. This forced adversarial thinking surfaces biases that would otherwise stay hidden in groupthink and overconfidence. You can do this for yourself. When you're leaning toward a decision, spend 30 minutes building the strongest possible case against it. Really try. Imagine you're arguing with someone who holds the opposite view. What would they say? What evidence would they cite? What flaws would they point out in your reasoning? This exercise is uncomfortable because it challenges your ego, but it produces clarity. Let's talk about another massive bias: anchoring. This is your brain's tendency to rely too heavily on the first piece of information you receive. A recruiter tells you the salary range for a position starts at $90,000. Even if you were thinking you needed $110,000, that $90,000 anchor drags your expectations down. You start thinking, well, maybe $100,000 would be reasonable. Anchoring happens in overthinking all the time. Someone casually mentions that your idea seems difficult. That becomes the anchor. Now, as you think through the idea, difficult is your baseline. Everything gets filtered through that lens. But what if the first person you talked to had said, "That sounds exciting"? Same idea, different anchor, completely different mental frame. The solution? Be aware of anchors and consciously adjust. When you notice you're fixated on a particular number, frame, or perspective, ask yourself, where did this come from? Is it actually valid, or is it just the first thing I heard? What if I started from a completely different assumption? Here's something that might sting. Your overthinking often isn't about the decision at all. It's about avoiding the discomfort of committing. As long as you're still thinking about it, you don't have to face uncertainty. You don't have to risk being wrong. You don't have to deal with potential consequences. Overthinking becomes a comfortable prison where you get to feel like you're working on the problem without actually having to solve it. This is where biases and overthinking create a perfect storm. Your loss aversion makes you afraid of commitment. Your confirmation bias finds evidence to support that fear. Your anchoring keeps you stuck in negative frames. And your availability heuristic keeps surfacing examples of things going wrong. Layer it all together, and you've built an impenetrable wall of seemingly rational thinking that's actually just sophisticated procrastination. So, what do? First, recognize that perfect objectivity is impossible. You will always have biases. The goal isn't to eliminate them. The goal is to be aware of them and compensate for them. Think of biases like the wind when you're throwing a ball. You can't make the wind stop. But if you know which way it's blowing, you can adjust your throw. Second, simplify. Biases multiply when complexity increases. The more variables you try to juggle, the more room there is for distorted thinking. So cut through the noise. What are the 3 factors that actually matter in this decision? Not 30 factors. 3. Force yourself to prioritize. Force yourself to let go of the peripheral concerns that are probably just bias in disguise. 3rd, set decision deadlines and honor them. Biases love infinite time. The longer you deliberate, the more they can work their magic. But when you have a hard deadline, when you know you must decide by Friday, your brain shifts into action mode. You don't have the luxury of endless rumination. You have to focus on what actually matters and make the call. 4th, track your decisions and outcomes. This is huge. Keep a simple journal. What did I decide? What did I expect to happen? What actually happened? Over time, you'll see patterns in your own thinking. You'll notice that your loss aversion consistently overestimates downside risk, or that your overconfidence in certain domains leads to poor choices. This self-knowledge is invaluable. It's like discovering the specific ways your mental compass is miscalibrated, so you can correct for them. Let me tell you about someone I know who transformed her decision-making through this practice. She's a product designer in Brooklyn. For 6 months, she journaled every significant decision: which feature to prioritize, which design direction to pursue, which feedback to incorporate. She wrote down her reasoning, her confidence level, and her prediction of the outcome. When she reviewed her journal, she discovered something fascinating. Her intuition about user experience was almost always right, but her assumptions about technical feasibility were consistently wrong. She was overconfident in areas outside her expertise and underconfident in her own domain. That awareness changed everything. She started trusting her design instincts more and deferring to engineers on technical questions rather than overthinking both. Here's the deeper truth. Overthinking isn't usually about insufficient information. It's about insufficient trust in yourself. And that lack of trust often comes from not understanding your own biases. When you don't know which way your mental compass is off, you can't trust it. So you keep checking it, questioning it, looking for external validation. But when you understand your patterns, when you know where you tend to be overconfident or overcautious, you can make adjustments and move forward with appropriate confidence. One more bias worth mentioning: the planning fallacy. This is your tendency to underestimate how long things will take and how much they'll cost. You think you'll finish that project in 2 weeks. It takes 6. You think the renovation will cost $30,000. It costs $50,000. And what's fascinating is that even when you know about this bias, even when you've experienced it repeatedly, you still fall for it. This plays into overthinking because it creates a mismatch between expectations and reality. You make a decision based on optimistic timelines and budgets. Reality proves harder. And then you think, see, I should have thought about this more. I should have planned better. But more planning wouldn't have fixed the planning fallacy. Better calibration would have. The fix? Add buffers. Automatically. If you think something will take 2 weeks, plan for 4. If you estimate 30,000, budget 45. This isn't pessimism. It's realism informed by understanding your bias. And it prevents the regret and second guessing that feeds overthinking. Here's what I want you to take away from this. Your brain is not your enemy, but it's not infallible either. It's a tool with known quirks and limitations. When you try to make decisions without accounting for those quirks, you end up in overthinking loops that feel like progress, but aren't. The path forward isn't to think less, it's to think differently. Question your assumptions. Seek disconfirming evidence. Recognize your patterns. Set boundaries on deliberation, and most importantly, accept that some bias will always remain. Perfect objectivity is an illusion. The goal is good enough clarity to make timely, reasonable decisions and learn from the outcomes. Because here's the final kicker. Action corrects bias better than analysis does. When you stop overthinking and start doing, reality gives you feedback. Immediate, undeniable feedback. That startup you were worried about? You'll quickly learn if it's actually risky or if your loss aversion was overreacting. That relationship you were agonizing over? You'll discover pretty fast if it was worth fighting for or if your sunk cost thinking was keeping you stuck. Overthinking keeps you in your head where biases reign unchecked. Action brings you into the world where reality checks your assumptions. And that reality check, that feedback loop, that's what actually improves your decision-making over time. Not more thinking, better learning. So the next time you catch yourself spiraling in analysis, stop. Ask yourself, am I thinking or am I overthinking? Am I processing new information or am I just reinforcing existing biases? Am I moving toward a decision or am I avoiding one? And if the honest answer is the latter, close the loop. Make the call. Choose a direction. Because a biased decision that you learn from beats an endlessly delayed perfect decision that never comes. Your biases aren't going anywhere, but your life is. The question is, are you going to let mental quirks keep you stuck, or are you going to acknowledge them, account for them, and move forward anyway? Here's something that will completely change how you approach decisions. Most of them don't actually matter as much as you think they do. I know that sounds dismissive, maybe even reckless, but stay with me, because this single insight, properly understood, will free you from more overthinking than any technique or framework ever could. We treat decisions like they're doors. You choose one, it closes behind you, and you're locked into that path forever. Pick the wrong door, and your life is ruined. Pick the right door, and everything falls into place. This binary, permanent, high-stakes framing is what makes decisions feel so heavy. It's what triggers the overthinking spiral. Because if one choice determines your entire future, of course you need to analyze it from every conceivable angle. But here's the reality. Very few decisions are actually like that. Most decisions are more like choosing what to order at a restaurant. You pick something. If it's great, wonderful. If it's disappointing, you order something different next time. The world doesn't end. Your life doesn't fundamentally change. You just gained information about your preferences and the restaurant's menu. Let me be clear. I'm not saying every decision is trivial. Some genuinely are high stakes and difficult to reverse. Choosing to marry someone, choosing to have children, choosing to move to another country, these are decisions with significant long-term implications. They deserve careful thought. But here's what you need to understand. Even those decisions aren't as permanent as they feel. And more importantly, 90% of the decisions you're overthinking fall into the reversible category, yet you're treating them like irreversible ones. Think about career choices. You're agonizing over whether to accept a job offer at a tech company in San Francisco or stay at your current role in Boston. You've been thinking about it for 3 weeks. You've made pro-con lists. You've consulted friends, mentors, former colleagues. You've researched both cities exhaustively. You're trying to predict how you'll feel in 5 years based on a choice you make today. And underneath all that analysis is a fundamental assumption. This decision is permanent, but it's not. Let's say you take the San Francisco job. 6 months in, you realize it's not the right fit. The culture doesn't match your values. The work isn't as interesting as you hoped. The city is too expensive. What happens? You leave. You find another job. Maybe you move back to Boston. Maybe you try Seattle. Is it inconvenient? Sure. Is it embarrassing? Maybe a little. Is it life-destroying? Absolutely not. Now imagine the alternative scenario. You stay in Boston. A year later, you realize you made a mistake. You should have taken the risk. You're stagnant, regretful, wondering what could have been. What happens? You start looking for new opportunities. Maybe that San Francisco company is still hiring. Maybe you find something even better. Again, inconvenient, but far from catastrophic. Do you see what I'm saying? Both paths have flexibility. Both have exit routes. The decision feels permanent in the moment, but it's actually just the next step, not the final destination. And this is true for most career decisions, most relationship decisions, most life choices. They're directional, not deterministic. They influence your path, but they don't lock it in forever. This framework of reversible versus irreversible decisions is one of the most powerful mental models you can adopt. Jeff Bezos talks about this in the context of Amazon. He calls them Type 1 and Type 2 decisions. Type 1 decisions are irreversible or very difficult to reverse. They're like one-way doors. Once you go through, you can't easily go back. Type 2 decisions are reversible. They're like two-way doors. If you don't like what's on the other side, you can come back. The problem is that most people treat all decisions like Type 1 when the vast majority are actually Type 2. And when you treat a reversible decision as if it's irreversible, you bring inappropriate weight to it. You overthink it, you delay it, you try to achieve certainty that isn't necessary and probably isn't possible. Here's the liberating part. Once you identify that a decision is reversible, you can make it much faster. You don't need perfect information. You don't need to eliminate all risk. You just need enough clarity to take a reasonable next step. Because if it doesn't work out, you can adjust, you can pivot, you can reverse course. Let's get concrete. You're thinking about starting a newsletter about productivity. You could spend months planning it. What platform should you use? What should the content strategy be? How often should you publish? What if nobody reads it? What if you run out of ideas? These questions can paralyze you indefinitely. Or you can recognize this is a Type 2 decision. You can start with Substack. Publish weekly, write about topics you find interesting, and see what happens. If it doesn't resonate, you stop or change direction. If it takes off, you lean into it. The decision to start is completely reversible. Contrast that with a decision like taking out a massive loan to buy a house. That's much closer to Type 1. You can sell the house, but it's expensive, time-consuming, and potentially financially painful. So yes, that decision warrants more careful analysis. But even then, it's not truly irreversible. People sell houses and move all the time. It's harder to undo than starting a newsletter, but it's still possible. Now, here's where people get tripped up. They confuse discomfort with irreversibility. Ending a relationship is uncomfortable. Quitting a job is uncomfortable. Admitting a project isn't working is uncomfortable. So we avoid these actions, and in avoiding them, we treat the original decision as if it's permanent. We think, I chose this, so I'm stuck with it. But you're not stuck. You're just uncomfortable with the idea of changing course. This is especially true with sunk costs, which we talked about earlier. You've invested time, money, emotion into something. It feels wrong to walk away. But that discomfort isn't the same as irreversibility. You can walk away. It just requires accepting that the investment is gone and making a fresh choice about the future. That's psychologically difficult, but it's absolutely possible. Let me give you a personal example. A friend of mine in Portland started a boutique marketing agency. She spent a year building it, hired 2 people, signed a lease for office space, invested savings into equipment and branding, and then 6 months into operations, she realized she hated it. The client work was draining. The management responsibility was stressful. She missed the creative freedom of freelancing. She agonized over what to do. She'd invested so much. What would people think if she closed the agency? What about her employees? What about the lease? But eventually, she recognized that all of those concerns were about sunk costs and social discomfort, not about irreversibility. She could close the agency. It would be messy and uncomfortable, but it was absolutely doable. So she did it. She helped her employees find new jobs. She sublet the office. She went back to freelancing, and she's happier now than she's been in years. Was closing the agency harder than never starting it? Of course, but it wasn't impossible. And the temporary discomfort of unwinding a mistake was far better than spending years in a situation that made her miserable. The decision to start the agency felt huge and permanent. The decision to close it felt impossible. But both were reversible. She just had to accept the discomfort of reversing course. This brings me to an important distinction. Reversibility doesn't mean consequence-free. Actions have consequences. Changing jobs affects your career trajectory. Ending a relationship affects 2 people's lives. Starting and closing a business costs money and time. I'm not suggesting you treat decisions carelessly because everything's reversible. What I'm suggesting is that you stop magnifying consequences into catastrophes. You can recover from a bad job choice. You can heal from an ended relationship. You can rebuild after a failed business. People do it every single day. The consequences are real, but they're manageable. And recognizing that they're manageable removes the paralyzing weight that leads to overthinking. Here's a practical exercise. Take a decision you're currently overthinking. Write it down. Now ask yourself, if I make this choice and it doesn't work out, what would reversing it actually involve? Be specific. Not, it would be terrible, but I would need to submit applications to other companies. Or I would need to have a difficult conversation and spend some time alone. Or I would need to find a subletter and move my stuff. When you make the reversal concrete, it usually becomes clear that it's uncomfortable, not impossible. And that clarity deflates the overthinking. You realize you're not facing a life or death choice. You're facing a choice with manageable downsides that you can handle if needed. Now let's talk about the flip side. How do you identify truly irreversible decisions that deserve more careful thought? Here are some markers. Irreversible decisions typically involve significant financial commitment that's difficult to recover, legal obligations that are hard to exit, physical changes that are permanent, or commitments to other people that deeply affect their lives. Having a child is largely irreversible. You're responsible for another human being for at least 18 years, and the emotional bond lasts a lifetime. Getting a face tattoo is irreversible in a practical sense. Laser removal exists, but it's expensive and imperfect. Co-signing a large loan for someone is hard to reverse without significant financial or relationship damage. Burning a professional bridge through unethical behavior is difficult to undo. These decisions deserve your careful thought. Gather information. Consider long-term implications. Consult people you trust. Take your time. But notice how short that list is compared to the number of decisions you agonize over. Most of what you're overthinking doesn't belong in that category. Here's another liberating insight. Reversibility reduces regret. When you know you can change course if needed, the pressure to make the perfect choice evaporates. You're not trying to see the future perfectly. You're just making the best choice you can with current information, knowing you can adjust as you learn more. This is how successful people move fast. They're not smarter than you. They're not blessed with better intuition. They're just comfortable with reversible decisions. They know that choosing the wrong path isn't failure, it's information. They'll learn something, adjust, and keep moving. While you're still deliberating which path is perfect, they've already tried 3 paths, learned from each, and found one that works. Think about product development. Companies like Apple, Google, Amazon, they don't spend years perfecting a product in secret and then launch it perfectly formed. They launch beta versions. They test with small groups. They iterate based on feedback. They're comfortable releasing something that's good enough, learning from real-world use, and improving it. That's only possible because they treat product decisions as reversible. This feature didn't work? Remove it. This design isn't resonating? Change it. You can apply the same approach to your life. Want to learn graphic design? Take an online course. If you hate it after 2 weeks, stop. You're out $100 in some time, but you learned that graphic design isn't for you. That's valuable information acquired cheaply. Contrast that with spending 6 months deliberating whether you should take a course, never starting, and still not knowing. Here's a mental shift that helps. Think in experiments, not commitments. I'm going to try working remotely for 3 months and see how it affects my productivity and well-being. That's an experiment. I'm committing to remote work forever is a commitment. The experiment frame makes the decision feel lighter, more reversible, easier to start. Same decision, different frame. And that frame changes everything. With the experiment mindset, you're not looking for guarantees. You're looking for learning. You're okay with the possibility that the experiment might not yield the results you hoped for because either outcome teaches you something valuable. Let me address a concern you might have. Doesn't this reversibility mindset lead to commitment issues? If you always think you can change your mind, won't you lack follow-through? Won't you quit too easily? That's a fair question, and here's my answer. There's a difference between recognizing that something is reversible and treating everything as disposable. Reversibility is about removing unnecessary pressure, not about lacking dedication. When you start something, you should fully commit to giving it a real try. But you should also give yourself permission to change course if it genuinely isn't working, without treating that change as a moral failure. The problem isn't people who adjust course when something isn't working. The problem is people who never start because they're terrified of choosing wrong. Reversibility addresses the latter problem. And for people who struggle with the former, who quit too easily, the issue isn't their understanding of reversibility. It's their lack of commitment, which is a different challenge requiring different solutions. Here's what I've noticed in my own life and in people I respect. Recognizing reversibility actually increases commitment. When you're not paralyzed by the fear of making a permanent mistake, you can fully engage with your choice. You're not constantly second-guessing or looking over your shoulder at other options. You've chosen a path, you're exploring it fully, and you trust yourself to make a different choice if this one stops serving you. That's very different from anxiously clinging to a choice because you're terrified of the consequences of changing it. That's not commitment, that's fear. And fear-based persistence is exhausting and ineffective. Let me bring this back to overthinking. When you're stuck in analysis paralysis, ask yourself this question. Is this decision actually irreversible, or does it just feel that way? 9 times out of 10, it just feels that way. And when you recognize that, the pressure drops. You can make a choice, see how it plays out, and adjust if needed. This doesn't mean decisions don't matter. They do. Every choice shapes your experience and your path. But shape doesn't mean determine. You're not powerless to change direction. You're not locked into one trajectory forever. Life is more flexible, more forgiving, and more full of second chances than your overthinking brain wants you to believe. Here's a final thought on this. Embracing reversibility requires trusting yourself. You have to trust that if you make a mistake, you'll recognize it and fix it. You have to trust that you can handle the discomfort of changing course. You have to trust that you're resilient enough to recover from setbacks. If you don't trust yourself in these ways, every decision feels irreversible because you fear you won't be able to handle the consequences. But you can. You have handled every challenge your life has thrown at you so far. You've navigated uncertainty, adapted to change, recovered from disappointments. That track record should give you confidence that you can handle future challenges too. So start treating reversible decisions like what they are: experiments, next steps, learning opportunities. Make them faster. Make them with less angst. Make them with the understanding that you're choosing a direction, not a destiny. And watch how much mental energy that frees up, energy you can redirect toward actually living your life instead of endlessly planning it. Because at the end of the day, overthinking reversible decisions is like refusing to leave your house because you might pick a restaurant you don't love. Yes, you might. And if you do, you'll eat somewhere else next time. The tragedy isn't choosing the wrong restaurant. The tragedy is staying home, hungry, convinced that if you just think about it long enough, you'll magically know which restaurant is perfect. That certainty doesn't exist. And while you wait for it, life is happening without you. Let's bring this all together. You've learned about analysis paralysis, about how overthinking masquerades as productivity while actually keeping you stuck. You've explored intuition, understanding that it's not magic, but pattern recognition built through experience. You've confronted cognitive biases, those mental shortcuts that distort your thinking without you even realizing it. And you've discovered the liberating concept of reversible versus irreversible decisions. Now, here's what matters most. What are you actually going to do with all of this? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Knowing about these concepts changes nothing if you don't change your behavior. You can understand overthinking intellectually and still spend the next 6 months paralyzed by a decision about changing careers. You can recognize your biases and still let them run your life. You can acknowledge that most decisions are reversible and still treat every choice like it's permanent. Information without implementation is just interesting trivia. So let me give you a framework, a practical system you can actually use starting today to make better, faster decisions and stop losing your life to overthinking. This isn't theory. This is the operating system for decision-making that successful people use, often without even articulating it. Once you see it clearly, once you internalize it, it becomes automatic. First principle, ruthlessly categorize your decisions. Not all decisions deserve equal mental energy. In fact, treating all decisions equally is one of the fastest paths to decision fatigue and overthinking. You need to develop the ability to quickly assess. How important is this? How reversible is this? How much time does this deserve? Here's a simple matrix. Low importance, high reversibility. Decide in under 5 minutes. What should I have for lunch? Which podcast should I listen to on my commute? Which color notebook should I buy? These are friction decisions. They don't matter enough to warrant analysis. Pick something reasonable and move on. Every minute you spend overthinking these is a minute stolen from things that actually matter. Low importance, low reversibility. Decide in under 30 minutes. These are rare, but they exist. Maybe you're choosing a tattoo design. It's not life-changing, but it's on your body permanently. Do a quick consultation, look at a few options, pick one you like. Don't obsess, but don't be completely careless either. High importance, high reversibility. Decide within a week. This is where most of your career and life choices actually fall. Which job offer to accept? Whether to start that side project? Whether to end a relationship that isn't working? These matter, and they deserve real thought. But they also have exit ramps if things don't work out. So give yourself a clear deadline, gather relevant information during that window, and decide. 1 week is almost always enough to reach good enough clarity. High importance, low reversibility. Take your time, but still set a deadline. Maybe it's a month. Maybe it's 3 months for something truly major, like whether to have children or whether to make a permanent move to another country. These decisions deserve deep consideration, consultation with people you trust, and careful thought about long-term implications. But even here, endless deliberation doesn't help. At some point, more information yields diminishing returns. Set a deadline. Honor it. This categorization does 2 powerful things. First, it prevents you from wasting enormous energy on trivial decisions. Second, it ensures you're actually investing appropriate thought into genuinely important ones. Right now, you probably do the opposite. You agonize over lunch and rush major life choices because you're mentally exhausted from overthinking everything. Second principle, define enough information. For every decision category, you need a clear threshold of what constitutes sufficient data to make a reasonable choice. This isn't about perfection. It's about establishing when continued research stops adding value and starts feeding overthinking. For a low-stakes choice like picking a laptop, enough might be. Identify your budget. Read reviews of 3 well-rated options in that range. Pick one. That's it. For a high-stakes choice like joining a startup, enough might be understand the business model, meet the team, research the market, talk to current and former employees, review the compensation package. That's a lot more due diligence, but it's still finite. It's still achievable in a reasonable time frame. The trap is treating enough as a moving target. You gather the information you said you needed, but then you think, maybe I should also check this other thing, and then another thing, and another. Before you know it, you're in month 3 of researching laptops. Define your information threshold up front. When you hit it, decide. Don't let yourself move the goalposts. Third principle, separate thinking time from decision time. This is huge. Overthinking happens when these blur together. You're thinking about a decision for weeks, which really means you're occasionally worrying about it, getting no closer to a choice, and feeling productive because you're working on it. Instead, block actual thinking time. If you're deciding whether to pursue a master's degree, set aside 3 focus sessions of 60 minutes each over 1 week. In those sessions, you actively research, list pros and cons, talk to people who've done it, run financial projections, whatever constitutes your enough information threshold. Outside those sessions, you don't think about it at all. You trust that you'll address it during dedicated time. Then, after your final thinking session, you have a decision session. This is different. This is when you review everything you've gathered and make the call. Not continue researching. Not gather more opinions. Make the actual decision. Separating these modes prevents the endless loop of half-thinking that characterizes overthinking. Fourth principle, use forcing functions. Left to your own devices, you'll deliberate forever on difficult choices. So create external constraints that force decisions. Public commitments work well. Tell a friend, I'm going to decide about the job offer by Friday and let you know what I chose. Now you have accountability. The decision has a deadline, and someone will notice if you don't honor it. Financial constraints work too. Sign up for that course with a non-refundable deposit. Now you've forced yourself to start. Set a meeting with your boss to discuss transitioning out if you don't get the promotion. Now you've created a timeline. These mechanisms remove the option to indefinitely delay, which is what overthinking feeds on. Fifth principle, pre-decide your decision-making process. This sounds meta, but it's incredibly powerful. Before you're in the heat of a difficult choice, decide how you'll make decisions. What's your framework? What are your values? What matters most to you? For example, you might pre-decide, in career choices, I weight growth potential over stability, and I trust my gut about team culture after meeting people twice. Now, when you're evaluating a job offer, you have criteria. You're not reinventing your decision-making philosophy from scratch. You're applying a framework you've already committed to. This prevents a common overthinking trap, changing your criteria mid-decision to justify whichever option you're currently leaning toward. If you've pre-decided what matters, you can't as easily rationalize. The job either meets your criteria or it doesn't. Sixth principle: practice making small decisions quickly. Decision-making is a skill. Like any skill, it improves with practice. But you can't only practice on high-stakes choices. That's like only practicing basketball by shooting game-winning shots in the championship. You need reps in low-pressure situations. So deliberately practice fast decisions on things that don't matter. You're at a coffee shop. Give yourself 10 seconds to choose a drink. You're browsing Netflix. Give yourself 2 minutes to pick something. You're organizing your weekend. Give yourself 15 minutes to make a plan. These exercises train your brain that decisions don't require endless deliberation. They train you to trust yourself, to commit, to move forward. Over time, this practice transfers to bigger decisions. The mental muscle of gather enough info, make a call, move on becomes stronger. And you'll notice that your quick decisions on small things are usually fine. You chose a latte. It was good. Or it wasn't your favorite. Either way, your life continued. That positive reinforcement builds confidence. Seventh principle: post-decision. Commit. This is critical. Once you make a choice, stop relitigating it. Overthinking doesn't end when you decide. For many people, it just shifts into a new mode. Second guessing. Did I choose right? Should I have picked the other option? What if I made a mistake? This post-decision overthinking is just as destructive as pre-decision overthinking. It prevents you from fully engaging with your choice. It keeps you mentally straddling two paths instead of walking confidently down one. And it doesn't change anything. The decision is made. Continuing to debate it in your head is pure waste. Here's a technique. After making a decision, write down why you made it. I chose Job A because the team culture felt collaborative. The growth opportunities aligned with my goals, and the location works for my lifestyle. Put it away. If you start second-guessing later, read it. Remind yourself that you had reasons. You weren't careless. You can trust past you's judgment. Then let it go and focus on making your choice work. Eighth principle: learn from outcomes, not hypotheticals. After a decision plays out, whether it goes well or poorly, extract the lesson. If you took a job and it's great, what signals did you read correctly during the interview process? If you started a business and it failed, what did you miss in your planning? This is how you improve decision-making. Real feedback from real outcomes. What doesn't help? Obsessing over what might have happened if you'd chosen differently. You took Job A. Job B might have been amazing, or it might have been terrible. You'll never know. And spending mental energy imagining alternate timelines is useless. You can't learn from things that didn't happen. You can only learn from things that did. This is a hard mental habit to break. Our brains love to construct counterfactuals. If only I'd chosen differently. But that thinking pattern keeps you stuck in regret and makes future decisions harder because you're carrying the weight of imagined missed opportunities. Let go of the alternate timelines. Focus on the timeline you're actually living. Ninth principle: get comfortable with regret. Here's a truth that nobody wants to hear. You will make decisions you regret. Guaranteed. You will choose paths that don't work out. You will miss opportunities. You will look back and wish you'd done something differently. This is not a sign of failure. it's a sign of living. The goal isn't to eliminate regret. The goal is to make decisions despite knowing regret is possible. And here's what makes this easier. Most regret fades. That job you agonized over leaving, 5 years later, you barely think about it. That relationship that ended, it hurt at the time, but now it's just part of your history. The business that failed, it taught you lessons you're using in your current success. Regret feels permanent when you're in it, but it's usually temporary. And the regret of inaction, of opportunities not taken because you were too afraid to decide, that tends to last longer and sting deeper than the regret of actions that didn't work out. So, if you're going to regret something, regret trying and learning rather than never trying at all. 10th principle, build decision support systems. You don't have to do this alone. Identify people in your life who are good decision makers, who can offer perspective without imposing their preferences, who can ask hard questions without judgment. These are your sounding boards, but use them correctly. Don't outsource your decision to them. Don't ask, "What should I do?" Ask, "How would you think about this?" Or, "What am I not considering?" Or, "Does my reasoning make sense?" You're seeking perspective, not delegation. The decision is still yours, but their input can help you see blind spots and escape mental loops. Also, be strategic about who you consult. Don't ask your risk-averse parent about whether to start a business. Don't ask your impulsive friend about a decision that requires careful thought. Match the advisor to the decision type and limit the number of people you consult. Too many opinions create noise, not clarity. 11th principle, embrace satisficing over maximizing. This concept comes from behavioral economics. Maximizers try to make the optimal choice. They exhaustively research every option, trying to find the absolute best. Satisficers identify their criteria and choose the first option that meets them, even if a better option might exist. Research consistently shows that satisficers are happier. Maximizers often make marginally better choices, but they're less satisfied with them because they're always wondering if something better was out there. The mental cost of maximizing outweighs the marginal benefit of optimizing. Apply this to your decisions. Define what good enough looks like. When you find an option that meets that standard, choose it. Stop searching for the perfect apartment, the perfect job, the perfect partner. Perfect doesn't exist. Good enough, chosen with confidence and commitment, usually becomes great through your engagement with it. 12th principle, action generates clarity. I've said this throughout, but it bears repeating because it's the most important principle of all. Clarity doesn't come from thinking, it comes from doing. When you act, reality gives you information that no amount of analysis could provide. You're wondering if you'd enjoy content creation. Make 5 videos and see. You're debating whether a long-distance relationship could work. Try it for 3 months and evaluate. You're unsure if you want to live in a different city? Spend a month there if possible. Action answers questions that thinking can't. This is why overthinking is fundamentally flawed. It's trying to achieve certainty through a method that can't provide it. Thinking can help you understand options and implications, but actually knowing, genuinely understanding how something will feel and work for you, that requires experience. So when you're stuck, when you've gathered enough information and you're still uncertain, the answer is almost always, take the smallest viable action and see what you learn. Don't try to think your way to perfect clarity. Act your way to it. Let me share one final story. I know someone, a writer in Minneapolis, who spent 2 years thinking about writing a novel. She had ideas. She researched the publishing industry. She read books about craft. She attended webinars about plotting and character development. She felt like she was making progress because she was learning, but she wasn't writing. 2 years of preparation, 0 words of the actual novel. Finally, she realized that all her preparation was just sophisticated procrastination. She was overthinking because she was afraid the novel wouldn't be good, afraid she'd invested the idea with so much mental energy that the reality couldn't match, afraid of being a person who says they're writing a novel versus a person who actually writes one. So she made a rule: write 500 words every morning before work. No editing, no judging, just write. And something shifted. Within 6 weeks, she had 30,000 words. Rough, messy, imperfect words, but they existed. And in existing, they provided clarity. She discovered which characters worked and which didn't. She found plot holes she'd never seen in her outlines. She learned what her voice actually sounded like on the page versus in her head. A year later, she had a complete draft. It needed revision, lots of revision, but it was real. And she'd learned more about writing in that year of doing than in 2 years of thinking about doing. The clarity came from action, not contemplation. That's the lesson. That's what I want you to take from everything we've covered. Thinking has its place. Analysis has value. But overthinking, that endless loop of deliberation that never resolves into decision, that's not helping you. It's not making you smarter or safer. It's making you stuck. You already know what to do about most of the decisions you're facing. Underneath the layers of analysis and anxiety and what-ifs, there's a knowing. Maybe it's intuition built from experience. Maybe it's values you've held all along. Maybe it's just a preference that doesn't need to be justified. Whatever it is, it's there. And your job isn't to think until you find it. Your job is to quiet the noise enough to hear it. So here's my challenge to you. Right now, today, identify one decision you've been overthinking. Maybe it's been days. Maybe it's been months. Maybe it's something you've been carrying for years. You know the one I'm talking about. The decision that sparked you to read this in the first place. Apply the framework. Categorize it. Importance and reversibility. Define enough information. Do you actually need more data, or do you already have what you need? Set a deadline. When will you decide? And then honor it. Gather your information if needed. Block time to think. But on that deadline, make the call. Will you choose perfectly? Probably not. Will you have complete certainty? Definitely not. Will you potentially regret it later? Possibly. But will you move forward? Absolutely. And moving forward, even in a direction that turns out to be wrong, teaches you more and serves you better than staying stuck. Because here's what I know for sure. Your life is happening now, not in some future when you finally figured everything out, not after you've gathered enough information to feel certain. Now. And every day you spend overthinking is a day you're not fully living. The people you admire, the ones who seem to have it figured out, they don't have more clarity than you. They don't have better information or fewer doubts. They've just decided that imperfect action beats perfect inaction. They've accepted that uncertainty is part of the deal. They've made peace with the fact that some of their decisions won't work out, and they've chosen to move forward anyway. You can do the same. You can stop treating decisions like threats and start treating them like opportunities. You can stop demanding certainty and start embracing experimentation. You can stop letting overthinking steal your time, your energy, and your peace of mind. The path forward is clear. Not easy, but clear. Decide faster on small things. Use frameworks on big things. Trust your intuition when you have experience. Question your biases when you don't. Recognize that most decisions are reversible. Act, learn, adjust. And above all, commit to this simple truth. Done is better than perfect, and moving forward beats standing still. So what's it going to be? Are you going to spend another week, another month, another year trapped in the comfortable prison of overthinking? Or are you going to make the decision you've been avoiding, take the action you've been delaying, and start living the life you've been planning? The choice, as always, is yours. But now you know the choice to keep deliberating is itself a choice, and it's probably the wrong one. Decide, act, learn, repeat. That's the formula. That's how you master decision-making, not by thinking harder, but by thinking better and acting braver. Your move,